Hey, Peter.
Yeah. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I
Good
see
to
you've got the
hear.
same exciting backdrop I have.
I know, right? The nice beige tan, looking fun with the earth tones.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, this should be good. This is my first time actually being on a Zoom conference, like being a panelist on a Zoom conference. So I'm a
Me
little
too.
intimidated by that because I don't know how that all works, but I'm hopeful that it's not too hard.
Yeah, me too. And I always get a little bit nervous before these things, but that's not bad.
Yeah, yeah. It's a little different though. You're in the comfort of your home, so it's like,
But but you know the last well I did this on I've done this as a webinar a couple of times, but last time for the coalition was in a meeting last summer,
mhm.
and not seeing people in the room really cuts the energy down.
Oh yeah, because
Not
it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like when you're on the phone, right? Where it's like you can't really connect with the audience, so you're just kind of like, are they hearing me? Am I?
not the
I get
same.
that. Definitely. There's Lynette.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi,
How are you?
Lynette.
Hi, good to meet you, Peter and Vanessa.
Yeah.
Yes, likewise.
Sorry, I missed the earlier Zoom. I had the wrong date.
Oh no.
I'm glad I made this one.
Well,
This
so
is the
are
one
we.
that matters.
So are we.
Yeah, good.
Thanks everyone for joining us. We are still waiting for some of the panelists, but we're also going to give it some time so everyone can hop in. But thanks everyone for joining early today.
Sure. I'm just going to close the curtain so there's less light. I'll be right back. Oh, now it's too dark. Okay.
There you go. That's good. That's good,
Yeah.
Lynette. I can see you.
Okay, good.
I just saw a question from Gisela about how to log in, so I hope she's getting in now.
Yeah, it was a little misleading. I thought it was like logging you in as an attendant, but it worked out.
Yeah, we are working on getting her in and it looks like she just joined us and will be becoming a panelist here shortly.
Oh, there she is.
Okay, that was an abrupt entrance into the webinar. I saw that it was coming on and I was on. I could hear you, but I could not see my control panel. It was really
Oh.
Hi, Gisela.
Hi, Lynette. How are you doing?
Good, good. I have to admit I missed a couple of CEI board meetings too. Hi, Bob.
I don't think we had one recently though. So
Okay, yeah.
I think you're good. You might have missed one, maybe.
Okay, good.
Not too bad.
Hi. Ooh,
Hey, Bob.
hey,
Bob.
hectic day. Yeah.
Just breathe.
I know I need to. Lynette and Peter don't know, but I'm actually taking this call from Ogden, Utah.
Oh,
I had to fly out to Salt Lake last night. My daughter's having all these, not COVID, but all these horrible things have happened to her. So we have to shift to a new apartment. Yeah. So
oh, hope
literally,
she's doing, I hope she's doing better.
she's okay. I mean, she's resilient, but she's a number of things, bad things happen. So yeah, we felt I just had to fly out. Just spend a few days out here in
Yeah,
Utah.
that's good.
Yeah, so I got a hotel where I had good reception and so I could do the call.
Okay.
That worked out. I'm so glad.
Yeah, thanks.
Andrea, are we, so we all sign in as attendees? Is that how we were supposed to do this? Okay.
Yes, so we're still waiting for Jose, but also I want to give it a couple more minutes just to let some more attendees trickle in. But we'll go ahead and get started here shortly.
Yeah, I see 21 participants.
And Andrea is going to be actually managing the PowerPoint, Bob and all. And so you, Bob and I are going to be the moderators looking at the chat box and questions and answers. So whenever we are not speaking, that will be our duty, Bob, like looking at the questions and, you know, bring
I'm
them
very good at that. I'm an ADD person, so I'm good at multitasking. Wow, the big screen.
Yeah, so just wanted to make sure we clarify that because Andrea is not going to be able to see the questions coming in.
Yeah.
And hi, Alexander. Alexander is also one of our CCRH staff, and he is a proud graduate of the BAHIP program, internship program.
Great.
Oh,
We
nice.
haven't met Alexander. I mean, we've emailed, but I don't think we haven't met in person because you started around COVID or just before COVID.
Right.
Yeah, I made it by a month. I made the cutoff by a month. I started in February.
Yeah, and I think the last time I was at the office was in late January. So yeah, and I live in Oakland, so it's, you know, Sacramento.
Yeah.
It is an interesting time where people are starting new jobs without meeting anybody.
Yeah.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah, I joined a board that way, you know. So I'm the Zoom board member, you know.
And how's that working, Bob? As a Zoom
Pretty
board
good,
member?
pretty good. They work hard. This is 350 Bay Area. It's the climate change organization. So they keep me more than busy, busier than I want to be, but it's important work.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to go ahead and get started in about 2 minutes. So if anyone wants to grab some more coffee or head to the restroom, right now is the best time to do that.
There's Jose.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning, Jose.
Good morning.
Morning.
Wait, is it morning? No, I think it's
Afternoon.
Afternoon, yeah.
I'm like, wait, I think it's
Just barely, just barely.
It's afternoon, but we're still drinking coffee.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's 1 p.m.
It's the afternoon coffee.
That's right.
Well, I can say I'm certainly still working on the things I was going to get done this morning.
right.
I'm going apartment hunting this afternoon.
Oh,
Oh, wow. Busy day.
You're moving homes? Wait.
No. We're moving. My daughter's got to move out of her place.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to find an apartment in the next 2 or 3 days.
wow.
Pressure, no problem.
All right, everyone, we are going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the 9th Annual San Joaquin Valley Affordable Housing Summit, Standing Together by Staying Apart. My name is Andrea Solis, and I am staff to the Housing Collaborative. We're so excited to welcome you to today's session, which is Through the Storm, Leadership Strategies During Challenging Times. So just some background information on the organization itself. The San Joaquin Valley Housing Collaborative is a regional nonprofit that formed out of the California Partnership for the San Joaquin Valley in 2009. We exist to address housing issues affecting low to moderate income households in the Valley communities by advocating, building capacity, and collaborating for affordable, healthy neighborhoods and communities. And while typically we like to bring you these sessions in person, obviously that just wasn't a possibility this year, but we're excited to be able to share the same resources and teachings to you today. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our panelists for today.
You want to go first, Gazella? Or?
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Gisela Salgado, and I am with the California Coalition for Rural Housing. I oversee our highly esteemed Rural West internship program, which we have been running for the last 22 years to bring students of color, young people of color who have a passion for community development work to work with nonprofit organizations in our industry, especially in rural communities. I am a graduate of this internship program, and I'm also going to be introducing two of our young leaders that are going to be participating in this panel, who are also graduates of this amazing internship program. And so now I'll hand it over to Bob.
Why don't you introduce them, and then I'll introduce the other two.
Okay, awesome. Well, first we have Jose Nuño. He is with Visionary Home Builders of California, and he is the Vice President of Program and Services there. His career spans over almost, I think now 15 years. And he's also a council member for the city of Manteca and a great father and role model to younger generations of Latinx people in this community. The next person I'd like to introduce is Vanessa Guerra, and she is, well, she used to be a senior project manager for Mutual Housing California in Sacramento, and she was recently promoted to Associate Director of Construction and Sustainability. Her career also spans, I think now 10 years, a little bit more or less, and she is a proud daughter of immigrants, farm workers. And one of the projects that she worked on, that she oversees, is actually farm worker housing community in the city of Watsonville. And I'm sorry, not
Woodland.
Woodland. Woodland. Woodland.
Close.
And she also is now a mom to a beautiful baby. And I'm just very proud of both Jose and Vanessa as young leaders in rural development and as just amazing human beings and friends. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Gazella. So we're thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about, community development leadership from a long-term perspective, and also with some of our current leaders. And I'm Bob Zdenek. I've been in community development and affordable housing for over 4 decades. I must have started when I was 10 years old, but that's not true. And I ran a national CDC association, Community Development Corporation Association, for many years, and have worked at the local level in New Jersey, and with affordable housing, healthy housing, and at the Casey Foundation. So a diverse background. I've also been researching strategic partnerships and leadership. And so I interviewed over a course of about 9 months, 10 of our long-term leaders, some of whom are retired, and some of whom are currently still running organizations. And then published a paper with my writing partner and colleague, Dee Walsh. So what I want to do before we go through the part of the PowerPoint is introduce 2 of the really seminal leaders for many years who have joined us. First one that I'm going to introduce is Lynette Jung Lee. Lynette, who I've known for over 30 years, was a great leader. She was, for 27 years, the executive director of the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation in Oakland, and really, in other parts of the East Bay. And during her tenure, she was there 33 years, but 27 years as executive director. Their staff grew from 2 to 90. They developed over 1,400 units of rental housing, 200 homeowners, 300,000 square feet of commercial space. And if you ever go to a restaurant or a cultural center in downtown Oakland, you're inevitably going to be on some property that, including Swan's Market, that they developed. So she provided strong leadership. And after she retired, around 2010, she helped launch the Diversity and Health Training Institute. So that's a great, and Lynette, also one of the other things about Lynette is she's originally from Honolulu. And she's really, when you talk about culture and competency and collaboration, Lynette's Lynette's superb. And part of that, I think, is her roots in Hawaii. So we're delighted to have Lynette, and equally delighted to have Peter Carey, who's a legend and who's done some wonderful work, including 25 years as the 3rd CEO of Self-Help Enterprise. And during his tenure, which was 1990 to 2014, they only developed 3,900 units of rental and home ownership, helped rehab 3,000 units. And I found very interesting, over 20,000 families were helped with sewer and water connections in isolated rural communities, and the organizations continue to thrive. Peter was a former Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone, building schools and water systems, worked in West Virginia, and also as a former mayor. It's not often we get former mayors on these panels, so he also did that. So he's got a wonderful background. He's chair of many organizations, and I think, Peter, you just finished your tenure as board chair of the Housing Assistance Council, which you had to do a staff leadership transition, which can be very challenging, and he it came out very well. So that's Peter and Lynette, and you're going to benefit from their wisdom throughout this presentation. So can we go to the next slide, please? So a little bit under the welcome and introduction, you met the panelists. Now, my colleague Dee Walsh and I, and Dee is the Executive Vice President of Mercy Housing nationwide, wrote a paper called Community Development Leadership, sharing the leadership experience with emerging leaders of color. We'll show you the link later, but this was 12 interviews, and we looked at a number of themes, a number of strategies. So I'm going to talk about the themes and then turn it back to Gisela, who's going to ask some questions and facilitate some discussion. So next slide, please. So why we wrote the article was we really wanted to provide the wisdom of many long-term community development leaders. What's interesting is they got their start in the civil rights and social justice movements. Very relevant today. I mean, in a way, there's a lot of, I mean, there are differences, but there are a lot of similarities and relevance to what was happening in the late 1960s and early 1970s when a number of us, myself included, sort of came of age and we gravitated into community development. Again, the importance of their stories. I think one of the things I learned more late in my career is the importance of stories. Stories are really important to tell us power of what people have achieved, the impact, the careers, and then also talk about what their leadership style is. And so, we think these experiences will be really insightful. We want to encourage intergenerational discussion, learning, sharing. And it's a different world now, but there's a lot that can be gained from the veteran leaders. And likewise, the current leaders are doing some wonderful work. So share and learn from that. So that's why we wrote this article, and the San Francisco Federal Reserve published it last November. Next slide. So what we did in interviewing people is then after about half a dozen interviews, I started thinking, well, what are the key themes that are emerging? Well, the first one was, not surprisingly, social justice and human rights. And many of these leaders came out of social justice, human rights, youth organizations, or they all had direct roles. And both of our resource people, Lynette and Peter, are a good example of that. The other thing we saw is the value of community engagement. It was engaging people, working with different sectors, working with grassroots leaders, really engaging people. It's not just building housing or doing economic development. And I know this is more of a housing discussion. It's getting people engaged, providing leadership opportunities, hearing their voice, helping them to develop. So this was core to the work, was the value of community engagement. And that's core to community change work over time. The third one that we theme, and actually this is a direct quote from my interview with Lynette Lee in her house, was strategic and courageous leadership. Lynette hit on that point, which I think was really important, that these leaders were strategic. They were also courageous. They took some very tough positions. They really stayed to their vision and engaging other people and moving forward in a strategic way. The fourth theme is a champion of place. We really saw that they really believe, committed. They may not have grown up in the neighborhoods. I think more than half of the leaders that I interviewed were not from the community or neighborhood that they worked in. Gordon Chin, for example, grew up in Oakland, where I live, but he was the longtime director of the Chinatown Community Housing in San Francisco, and compared Chinatown, San Francisco to Harlem, New York, as really a spiritual place for the Chinese community. And I think that speaks well to the notion of a champion of place. It's an ecosystem. It brings together people and place, not just place. It's not just people, but it's the intersection of the value add of people and place. And then the next thing we saw was instinct for policy. The growth of community development has not just occurred by building housing or doing economic development or job training and placement, but it's creating policies and programs, sometimes that did not exist. So many of our leaders played leadership role in developing policies. They're creating programs like the CDFI Fund, the Community Development Financial Institution Fund at Treasury, some of the housing programs, and especially at the state level. So there's these leaders all had a real natural instinct for policy, and it was really an important component of what they were doing, because low-income communities often don't have necessarily sometimes the policy advocates and leaders that can help advance policy that makes a short-term, mid-term, and long-term difference. Next slide. Okay, then the second, there's 5 more themes, and then we're going to get into a discussion. The ability to balance priorities and institute good business practices. And this is part of, I had this conversation with Peter and a number of others, is that have the right programs, but you have to have the systems in place, the practices, the processes, because affordable housing is very difficult to do. It's a very fine line. You're providing subsidies and to keep these projects, floating and to be able to pay back your investors requires really good management and systems. So it's balancing priorities and instituting good business practices. So it's both, it's in a way sort of a movement and an industry. The industry side is the good business practices, and the movement side is balancing priorities and vision to help rebuild and reimagine the communities. The next one was importance of good governance. It's not a one-person job. You can be extraordinarily intelligent, but you're not going to succeed unless you involve other people. And so the importance of really good governance and how organizations evolve, which we'll talk about later, is having a board that is both representative, strategic, and in a way really owns the organization along with the members and the staff. So governance is really critical to the growth of an organization. And often founders don't spend a lot of time on that because it's their powerful vision, they're moving forward, but over time, good governance becomes really a critical element to leadership over the long term. The next one, which we all know about, is the growing importance of collaboration. We see these issues, we see complicated issues. We see health, we see education, we see vacancies, we see people, food insecurity. You don't have to be an expert at all this. It's working with other organizations, bringing them to the forefront and partnering with them. And Lynette's organization was a model for collaborating with many other organizations in Oakland and surrounding communities. Self-Help Enterprises has done a number of new partnerships since COVID-19. And I've seen through my work with CCRH on Rural Disaster Guide, the growing collaboration and opportunities. Crisis leads to opportunity and ability to forge new partnerships. So I think we're seeing that, and I think we'll continue to see more of that. And then definitely not last and least is the need to constantly nurture youth, next generation. Over half the leaders that we interviewed started out doing youth work. Lynette, for example, was a teacher. She worked with youth in alternative settings, and that led her to eventually to East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation. So this need to nurture youth and the next generation, constant theme that we saw, and really want to underscore that. Next slide. Okay, back to Gisela.
Great. Well, thank you, Bob, for walking us through those themes, leadership themes. And I mean, one of the things that I know, we certainly know, is that many of our longtime theme leaders in this field do have their kind of like their beginnings in the civil rights movement, right? And my understanding, I know that for Lynette and Peter here, it's definitely the case. Your careers in affordable housing were rooted in the civil rights movement. And what I'd like to know, and I think most of the people in the webinar would like to hear about what you learned about leadership through those times, and how did it shape your leadership style then and over time? So if Peter or Lynette, you would like to answer that.
Okay, thank you, Gisela and Bob, for that generous introduction. I'm happy to start first. My first job after getting a teaching credential was with in a community school for immigrant high school students and gang kids in Oakland, Chinatown. And the school actually was started by a youth group composed of high school and college students called East Bay Asians for Community Action, EBACA. And actually, I was the oldest person there at 23. So, but what we did was teach ESL, American government, civics, and community issues to the youth. And we also ran an evening program for adults, starting with ESL, but also getting into community issues. And for both of them, it was really important for them to understand what was happening around them that was impacting them. For example, the redevelopment agency had torn down 3 blocks in the center of Chinatown. So removing affordable housing, small businesses and churches and other institutions. And what were those empty blocks going to become? That was going to be really important. And how would it serve the community? So part of our work was to inform our students about these issues, get them involved, have them in discussions, get their opinions as to what needed to be for the future, and organize them and bring them to public hearings and city council meetings to state their opinion. And from that, I learned how you really need to engage everybody, especially the people who are going to be most impacted by what's going on, and to share that leadership, make them feel that they are also leaders in their community, and to amplify their voices. So we also worked with other community groups around that time, including the Black Panthers. And so Ebica supported Bobby Seale when he ran for mayor of Oakland. And so again, I've learned that you need to work together with people within the organization, with people outside the organization, and with other community groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. I think that definitely speaks to collaboration, right? And listening to the community and people that are impacted by the work that you're doing or the services that you're providing, and definitely nurturing in the process.
Right.
Young people, new leaders, right?
Right.
Thank you for sharing that.
I also
Peter,
learned from the younger people in my organization as well. So older folks can learn from younger people too.
That's good to hear. I grew up in the 60s, high school and college, both in the 60s. And yeah, my high school was very tuned into community and social issues. I'm not sure the students all were, but the school wasn't really emphasized that. Where I went to college was not. And so, you know, I was kind of on the edges of that piece of the civil rights movement. And it was really when I came to California as a VISTA volunteer and came to Self-Help Enterprises that the sort of stark reality of the conditions of farm workers in California really struck home with me. And there was a dichotomy for me in so many ways, because clearly society did not respect the people who were working the fields. And yet the organization that I came to work for, Self-Help Enterprises, which was founded by the Quakers, clearly demonstrated every day the values of those farm worker families, the commitment to community, the commitment to homes and raising families. And I saw that incredible dichotomy. And so what drew me to stay with Self-Help Enterprises was that their efforts were not confrontatory, but they set out to prove every day that low-income families, particularly farm workers, could be good community members, hardworking, cared about raising their families, cared about a better life for their families. And so the mission of the organization, which was really rooted in some ways in concrete works, in proving the worth of all people, just drew me to it. And so I was thinking about your question, and it really began, I think, my commitment began when I got here. And one of those interesting things that occurred to me is that when I arrived here in the early 70s, I can tell you that working in community development was not a respected career. It wasn't even considered a career. And it was almost embarrassment to explain to people what you did. That has changed today. And I'm so thrilled now that we have a generation that is anxious to work, anxious to take leadership, because I think that proves that just in time for the current environment, we have proven the value of this work.
Thank you. And I think that also the current times that we're living in definitely calls for and shows the urgent need to address many of the issues that you are bringing up, Peter, including the dignity of farm workers and providing real adequate housing, being that I think everyone knows now, being the fact that not only farm workers, but frontline workers in this pandemic are essential workers, and they definitely, merit, and not only merit, but we all deserve to have adequate housing. So speaking of that, I feel that, the current times living through this pandemic, the wildfires now going on, and civil unrest call for us, especially leaders in this field of housing, to seize this moment as an opportunity to not only respond to the urgent needs, but to achieve transformational change and shape our future. So when you think about that, which of the leadership themes have resonated with you the most through difficult times? That's one question to all panelists. So whoever would like to answer that, that would be great. And I have two additional ones that you can think about too, and maybe you can decide who wants to answer that. How is your organization responding to the current times, you or your organization? And the last question is, what is your vision for the future in your region, in your community, or in your CDC? It's a pivotal moment. And again, I think it calls for a lot of new ideas. It's an opportunity to create something new as well, as we are trying to respond to the urgent needs of our communities. So whoever would like to go first, this is 3 questions open to all panelists.
I'll go ahead and answer one of the questions, Gisela. I think the leadership theme that resonates with me the most would have to be champion of place. As you mentioned in my introduction, my background was in farm working. My entire family were farm workers, and I was as well. So I learned, what that is at a very young age, how hard it is to be a farm worker. And so now to be in this capacity, to be in this capacity where I'm able to address the housing needs that families like mine used to go through, I think is really what essentially fuels my passion and my ability to really do what I want to do and take a leadership role, take initiative to really, provide a solution to that problem. And so in reality, I think when it comes to leader or serving as a leader in a particular situation, you really need that sort of drive or fuel, as I previously stated, to really give you the confidence and courage to really, keep the eye on the prize and stick to it, because there are a lot of obstacles that, come in your way. And so you really need to have that, that passion to really get through that and overcome those challenges. So I would definitely say, especially during these times, having some kind of feeling of a champion, whether it's with or without support, I think is really what's going to get you, further along the way.
So I'll go next, and I'll take 2 of the questions. So the first one is I'm going to show something probably not very many people has ever seen. And I'm going to show you, and hopefully this is a blast from the past. So it's a picture, and I'm going to, hopefully you guys can see a little bit. it might be a little blurry, but self-help enterprises back in the day, my parents were part of it. And that picture is my grandmother, myself with the big curly hair, because at one time, you can't tell now, but I had a lot of hair, and my sister. So I was probably around about 14, 15 years old there. And I say that picture back blast from the past because who would have thought that fast forward to 2020, I'm now helping other families get into housing. Who would have thought that this is the field I would have got in, and helping families, single family, multifamily, and it all started with the internship program, being accepted into it. And that's my passion. Thing Vanessa was talking about passion. It's like I've been able to grow within the company I'm at, Visionary Home Builders, but definitely Self-Help Enterprises has always been a great place that gave me beginning for housing, if you look back, for me and my family. So as an organization, what we're doing today, because of seeing that type of impact we're doing, is that we're preparing for a big flux of people who are going to be looking at housing displacement probably in the next couple of months. We've been, as a multifamily affordable housing developer, single family, and also doing a bunch of programs that we do housing related, financial capabilities, rental counseling. We're ramping that program up in anticipation that we are going to be seeing a lot of families asking for help. Daily, we're getting a lot of, up and down the valley, we're getting a lot of calls for assistance. And part of it is people who are looking into home ownership, but the other one is, hey, I'm having trouble with paying my rent, how programs, and there's different programs coming out from the local, state, and federal level. But a lot of people are still coming out, and it's really the folks, there's two worlds that we're seeing, and you guys have probably heard of you heard the U, the V, now the K, the gap between the haves and have-nots. That's increasingly happening, and the letter they're using is K to show that curve. And we're seeing our families are starting to realize, like, hey, the assistance has gone away. We need new resources. So at the local level, there's new programs coming, but as a regional provider of housing, we're looking at different ways to continue building multifamily, but also supporting those who are already in housing or about to avoid homelessness to occur to them, because for a lot of families, that's the next step that's about to hit. And we're educating them on how to retain their housing, how to look at different avenues to advance their housing opportunities. So that's just part of the answer, Gisela, that you wanted to see as an organization. What are we doing to address that?
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for all the work you're doing to address the needs. Lynette and Peter, or Peter, would you like to add?
Sure. I just add that I can't add much to what both have said, but I think that, I'm a builder. I like to build things, and I get great satisfaction out of seeing a project completed or whatever. But I think that we're in an era when it is important for us to remember why we're doing it. And Jose's story reminds me pretty clearly why. Because the why is what's going to keep us energized in an era when we may face more opposition, we may face more racism and all those other ugly things, more open. And it is the why that will continue to drive us. And we need to be champions, not just for the place, for the organization, and also for the mission.
So to me, all of the leadership themes are really important, but what really speaks to me is the issue of social justice and the willingness to speak up for what is right, even if it costs you. So Oakland, for many decades, has been very supportive of affordable housing, but 2 minutes away is the island city of Alameda, which for decades has had a history of racism. And I actually go to a church in Alameda that is led by a pastor who's very committed to racial justice. In the late 1990s, Rents were going up tremendously, as well as housing prices. And many people had to leave the city because they could no longer afford it. And people were really distressed about it. So our church actually helped start an organization called Renewed Hope Housing Advocates, and lent a minister in training to help organize, especially renters. And so we had 150 members who were going before city council and talking about the need for some solutions to the increasing rents. And I brought this issue to my board at Ibalsi, and we saw that there was 600 units of enlisted men's housing that was sitting vacant outside of the closed Naval Air Station in Alameda. And these were 3 and 4 bedroom townhouses and apartments, and they were vacant. So we said, well, let's suggest to the city council, maybe they could save a quarter of these and rehab them and make it available to low and moderate income families. So we developed a proposal with Renewed Hope, gave it to the city council. I was called an evil woman by one of the council members for doing that. And they tossed it out. Eventually the 600 units got torn down and it was sold to a private developer for market rate housing. Eventually also Renewed Hope sued the city over the lack of affordable housing. And out of a settlement agreement, there 25% of the new housing built at the old base, now called Alameda Point, has to be affordable. And the city is following that plan. Since then, the city has put out RFPs for affordable housing developers. Balsi has never gotten chosen, and it's okay. The same thing happened at Brooklyn Basin in Oakland, where a private developer bought 69 acres of port land to build market rate housing. Community advocacy groups started organizing to ask for community benefits, and they asked me to come to some of the meetings with the developer. Since the developer had 69 units, I said, well, how about if you donate 3 acres for affordable housing? The developer didn't like that idea. But eventually the city did buy 3 acres at too high a price, I'm afraid. And affordable housing is being built there. We were never invited to be part of those, but I think it was important to do that so that other developers could create that housing.
Thank you, Lynette, for sharing that. I think at the point when you said, oh, they demolished all those homes and, you know, sold it to a developer, I was like, oh, heartbreak. But then when you kept going and told us that eventually there were some positive outcomes, it also speaks to the endurance and persistence and being able to continue the fight and continue to have like follow that North Star. So thank you, Lynette, for that. So I'm looking at our question and answer box here, and we would love to encourage questions from the audience. Feel free to post your own questions, comments, thoughts as we continue to have this conversation with our leaders here. So I think, Bob, we're ready for the next segment.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Gazella, and our 4 leaders, because that was some really good discussion. So we're going to talk about briefly the phases of leadership. Been doing a lot of work over the past 3 decades trying to think through how does leadership evolve and grow in community development and affordable housing. And it's not, this chart looks linear, but it's not meant to be linear. And I'll talk about that. So we saw there's 4 phases, and you don't have, so the first one is, and maybe some of you are in this phase, especially with fledgling new organizations. I don't know what types of organizations all of you who are attending come from, but this is where a visionary entrepreneurial leader comes and either starts an organization or comes in early and sees problems to fix and takes, challenges, and then also has the vision and will not be deterred that the community can be revitalized. I think Lynette came, even though Lynette was not the founder of Evolsi, she was fairly early in Evolsi's evolution. So she came in as a vision, when she took over as a visionary entrepreneurial leader of a young, small organization, and really helped guide it forward by seeing opportunities, seeing things and partnering. So that's sort of the first phase. You don't want to lose the visionary part or the entrepreneurial part, but you can't just be entrepreneurial or visionary without systems and people engaged. The second phase is really building the organization. And it's really about sort of helping to get involving staff, growing staff, beginning to have systems, beginning to have a board that's, that can help the organization grow and at the same time be accountable to the community, helping people develop skills. Starting to see community development and affordable housing as both a movement and an industry. An industry to, that's these skills. And then the third phase is really where you become an enduring organization. You have staying power. You have, usually a strong balance sheet. You have the systems in place. You've learned to share leadership. You've got people throughout the organization that have authority in areas where they're responsible for. So you become an enduring organization. So there's no magic to it, but usually that's probably a 15 to 20 year process from the start, sometimes longer, sometimes a little bit less, but it's this whole notion of an enduring organization that's going to be around for the long term. And that's really important because you've got a visionary leader who started, so the organization can survive the visionary leader. The visionary leader can still be there, but the organization is established, it's enduring, it's really beginning to have impact. And then the fourth phase is really what I would call more the external phase, which is you really are using your influence. You're chairing statewide housing authority. You're doing what Peter did. We're reaching across larger systems. You're having to develop policy and resources that are federal, regional, state, and local. And you're working with different, more varied organizations, and your geography usually expands. And most of you are, I think almost all of you are rural, but so you have big geography anyway, but still it tends to grow and expand based on your capacity, your ability to really be a major player. And you can help. We see some of these organizations seeding other smaller organizations or helping them partner to grow to be effective resources. So those are sort of the four phases of leadership. But I think if you look at the experience that Lynette and Peter brought, they were able to sort of move the needle in terms of the growth of their organization. I think, Peter, you probably came in you've seen these phases, more at a second and third phase, but developing the systems, growing the staff, getting more projects and building more housing. That's critical to the influence and impact the organization is going to have over time and really what it does to improve the community and the lives of the residents who are, whether they're farm workers or, residents living in urban neighborhoods that are challenged by a bunch of, pressing issues. So that's sort of the notion of the phases of leadership. And it's helpful to sort of understand where you are within those phases and how you can draw from some of the others and that it's evolving. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to you. Oh, next slide. Let's do the next slide. Okay. Hey, there we go. Turn it back to you, Gisela.
Okay. For some reason, I thought we were going through more slides before this one. But okay. So looking at that, to all our panelists, this is actually a question to all of our panelists. Considering your former work within your CDC or even now, what were the 2 or 3 critical factors in having your CDC become a strong institution that has impact? And what 2 critical pieces of advice could you offer emerging leaders on having impact at their organizations? And maybe Lynette, Peter, you could speak to that.
Sure. But Bob, it's interesting. I've always thought of these as being phases, and yet, as I think about it, I think every organization needs all 4 elements. It's just that as an organization gets larger, more established, those elements may not all be in the same person. And I think that it's important that organizations work to ensure that those elements exist, whether they're all in the leader or in leaders throughout the staff. Isela, to your question, I think that the things that I set out to build in our organization in order to assure some long-term impact of the organization were the structures. Clearly, when I joined the organization, it was really I'd say a war on poverty social services model, which was a little different, and we worked to bring more business sense into what we did, not without some upheaval or some unhappiness. When I would talk about what it cost us to keep someone in the field per hour, people didn't always like that, but it's real. It's the reality. So the structures and the organizational structures, whether it's good accounting or good decision-making structures or other organizational structures, those were important. Clearly the people, and acquiring and hiring and enticing the right people to come on board was important. And frankly, when I look at the successes of the organization today, I take great pleasure in the fact that I encourage some of the leadership there to join the organization. And that's a lasting mark. And the third thing I'd say in our work was reputation of the organization. I think that building our reputation as an organization that produced and followed through on its commitments was critical to getting approvals and support from local communities throughout the Valley. So to me, those were the three things that I think I focused on, were structures, people, and reputation.
Okay. Thank you. Lynette?
Peter brings up really good points, and I would agree with them. I think for us, for Ebalse, having started in Oakland, Chinatown, and serving the Asian community, it was critical that we expand service beyond that community. Because we were seeing that newer Asian immigrants from Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam were moving into East Oakland and West Oakland because housing was available and it was cheaper. And so we decided to follow them. But we didn't want to be seen as an outsider coming into somebody else's community. So we worked with local organizations there as partners, and they had worked out our different roles, shared the development fee that would come, and to ensure that we would serve everybody in the community. And really over time, it's helped Ebalse to become a much more multicultural and diverse organization. Two, I think the importance of being careful with your money, and paying back loans is critical to help with building new projects in the future, and just being careful so that we're really using it towards the next phase, doing what we say we will do. And three, sorry, I have to look at my notes here. What was I going to say? Being able to take strategic risks to expand new programs.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so this is I suppose like a personal, well, all of these questions really pertain to your experience, but given the times that we're living, very difficult times, and you've been through difficult times before as well. And as a leader, you endure so many things as Lynette, and I think everybody, even our young leaders, everybody has experienced opposition to an affordable housing project, being called all kinds of things that frankly, we shouldn't need to be putting ourselves to, but unfortunately that happens. So as a leader, and this goes to all of you, what can you say about resilience and how to take care of yourself, especially in these trying times? How do you do that? And how do you model that for your staff and other people that are looking to you for leadership too?
I'll go and I'll start off this one. I would say that with staff, it's encouraging them also to share the stories about, we talked a little bit about the why we're doing the work that we're doing. It's easy to just be entrenched and, just see no way out. I mean, things are still going to continue to look bad. Housing affordability is bad. Housing opportunities are not as many as we want it to be. But it's also with staff is encouraging them. It's like, there is a win here for the reason with the work that we do. Whether it's sharing stories, every development project is different. Everyone has his own challenge. And at the end, I think Lynette was saying something, it was powerful for me, it stood out when she said that even if we have to lose, there's a lot of capital that we as humans have to put into this type of job. And from being at council meetings, people say, hey, you guys are the devil or the worst things ever, affordable housing, the poor people, right? I remind people is like, when you talk about the poor people, them people, that's me. I come from that, from farm worker family. We were those, and the representation of who we are, that's a big passion and a piece why we do the work that we do. So as an organization, there's not many of us around that do the type of work that we do. And a lot of times we're the lonely voice that are doing it. So whether our efforts today have an impact for other organizations or people tomorrow to come and get that work done, it starts someplace. And, and we are the pioneers from the ones from like the Peter, Lynette, and Bob, there's the next generation and there's another generation coming from behind us. So hopefully the work that we're doing, they start seeing the wins from that the pioneers all along the way have been putting to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd have to echo a lot of what Jose said. It really is tough sometimes, obviously going through these different that we face in this very sometimes controversial industry. But nevertheless, my thing is, how do you take care of yourself is really just taking a day at a time. Taking baby steps. Every day is a different day. And so we just, again, have to be committed to what our goal is. And I think also remembering, that we are part of a community, right? We are a network of housing developers that are facing the same thing, and to remember that we have those resources out there for us, that you're not alone, right? So we definitely, I feel that it's always important to rely on that. You have these other connections that you can fall back on, for instance, where people are facing the same challenges that you are or have already faced that challenge, kind of working off of each other and working together, whether it's, something simple where, it's just a simple challenge that you're dealing with on a project, or something grander where it's a policy issue that you're trying to push, in your local community. So I think it's really just taking it one day at a time and remembering who your resources are.
Yes, thank you.
On a personal level, because it can be pretty lonely, especially if you're leading a team or CEO or whatever. I found that peers were the most important support for me. And I was fortunate to have peers that I could talk to about things within the organization or other work-related things, who actually cared to hear what I had to say, and we could share back and forth, and so that peer support. And Vanessa, you mentioned networks. Those networks are critical. And sometimes you go to conferences, and honestly, it isn't necessarily what happens in the discussion, but it's what happens in the hallway outside, and people you connect with, because you do need that reinforcement. And then within the organization, I always work to to try to vocalize the positives of what we were doing, not to play Pollyanna. Not that I think there's anything wrong with Pollyanna. I mean, she believed in everybody and it all turned out okay. So, but I used to look at a room full of staff and be talking to them. And sometimes you get faces that feel kind of distracted or maybe you're not hearing what you're saying or whatever. But I began to realize that there were also people in that room who wanted to hear about the mission and wanted to hear the value of what we were doing and to be encouraged. And so I tried to speak to that group and encourage them so that the positives were verbalized. And I used to find that really helped, particularly at times when people were feeling a little demoralized and finding that maybe they'd just come back from a community meeting where they'd gotten beat up pretty good. That can be pretty demoralizing, or losing some funding or what have you. So I think that the verbalizing the mission and not just taking for granted that everybody there feels it quite the same is important, I think.
I think that all of you have said what's really important, and I want to just add to the issue of needing to inspire our staff and our board and the community about what we're doing is really important. And some of it is through telling stories, sharing stories of what's happening in other communities, being able to see that a lot of this work is long-term. You may not see results right away, but hopefully later. For example, in Alameda, there's now a mayor and a city council, the majority of city council, that's much more supportive of tenants' rights and affordable housing. The one thing that we did do at Ebalsi to help with staff in terms of burnout was to set up a sabbatical system for everybody. And we had a vacation plan that after working 6 years, an employee would earn a month of vacation or 4 weeks. And so we said, after 10 years, you can take a sabbatical, use your 1 month vacation, and we would add another month, and you have to take it together. So you can come back, you can go anywhere, come back refreshed and ready to go again. And later we got talked into moving it down to 8 years, and now it's 6 years. So every 6 years, any employee, including the custodians, the property managers, they get that sabbatical. And it's really been effective for staff retention and keeping people refreshed.
Wow, that speaks of wellness, Lynette, and keeping your sanity. So that has to be definitely helpful. But speaking of government, local government, and I suppose government in general, we have a question on the chat box, and it says, what can community members do when the governmental leadership is not taking the community's concerns seriously? And what is an appropriate way to encourage positive action by local leaders?
So I'd like to jump in there and say a little bit about that. So my other role that I do, as Gisela mentioned, is a city council member. So like on my council in Manteca, I'm the affordable housing expert there. But one of the things I would say is, if you want change in your community, people need to show up. Even as a council member, you don't have the power. You have a vote, but it's a council as a whole that has the power. But whenever you have a room full of people, your constituency saying, we need this in our community, people listen. And that's what really it takes, is it's the human capital of engagement to really be the squeaky wheel that says, we need this in our community. If not now, when? We need to do it. So to me, I see that's very important. You may have a champion for local government there to help move the agenda along, but it really does take people to be in those council chambers, or even now with COVID, being on those Skype meetings, Zoom meetings, emails, making noise. You have to make noise.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else would like to add to that? If not, we can continue on and turn it back to Bob.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gisela, and fellow leaders for a really insightful discussion. I was thinking, Lynette, that you would have been entitled to 5.5 sabbaticals if you took them every 6 years. You might still be there. You never know. Anyway, let's go to the next slide, please. And this is what we really are looking forward. And again, this captures some of the themes that I talked about, and then some of the answers and discussion that our 4 leaders shared with all of you. And then we're going to have some more discussion. So these are just from our work that we've seen. Again, it goes back to social justice, the critical nature, and then really inequality is a critical issue of our time. I think we could maybe add climate change along with that, but it really requires how we have to be conscious how we operate our organizations and ensure programs and actions are reflective of people we represent, are anti-racist, and that our communities continue to provide diverse leadership. And that's one of the strong points, one of the great work that Gisela and her colleagues are doing around developing the current and future generations of leaders throughout, I guess now I can say throughout the rural West Coast. So then a greater focus on collaborative innovation. You know, that's really critical because there's different perspectives, because we're going to be working on different issues. We looking at economic and racial inequality, climate adaptation, public health issues, the current COVID and aftermath of COVID. So it's being innovative in a collaborative way and working with others. And I did the book that I co-authored, Navigating Community Development. We featured the work of Ebalsi around health, around their Healthy Neighborhoods work and the collaboration that they've set up. It's really interesting, and it's really having some very exciting impact. Data and technology. Again, we have the systems, we have the resources. A lot of funders want to know the metrics. It's both the value side, but also sort of how is our work really changing things? How are we being effective? So looking at data and technology continue to play a growing role. And what I'm excited about is I think our younger generations are a lot bit more adept, and knowledgeable about than I am. And so I think that's exciting that we have people that know how to use data and technology to drive community change. Focus on what is possible. Sometimes don't get stuck. Sometimes I joke and say that perfection can be the enemy of the good. Or one of my favorite things is that people accuse me of this of being a rolling stone because it gathers no moss. It's always moving. So don't stop. Keep moving forward. Next slide. Again, looking at significant changes to public investments. With tax policies really driven a lot of our work. There's that new opportunity zones. I haven't followed it. I followed it a little bit, but I haven't seen yet a real breakthrough for community development and affordable housing. But there are other resources out there. I think, environmental stewardship. I think there's gonna be some new work around criminal justice and recidivism and trying to support restoration. So around some new financing sources, and hopefully after November 3rd there'll be some new opportunities. Then understanding the fundamentals of what drive investors. I mean, we depend on investors. That we want to share with them, make sure that we understand what they're looking for. That doesn't compromise what we're doing, but that we can make the business case as well as the community case in terms of the value of our affordable housing and other work. And it just becomes more and more important as we reach out to more investors. And those of you in the affordable housing world know better than I do that you're often cobbling together 7, 8, 9, 10 funding sources. So that becomes really critical to understand what drives investors. Relationships, really critical, especially around time of unpredictable change and opportunities. I used to say the 3 R's of economic development were relationships, and better relationships. So that's so key around how we reach out and interact with the larger ecosystem. Advocacy. That's constant. I want to beat the drum on that. That's critical, even more so now with with these massive crises we're going through, is to continue to be the voice. And it's tough, but sometimes if you're at the table, things happen. you know, I don't even know when, but you know, so the work that CCRH, to see it in other statewide networks in California do, Housing California, et cetera, really critical, and being part of that and supporting that work. The next slide. Be, you know, to quote Lynette Lee, be courageous, strategic, and I'm going to add and resilient and adaptable. I forgot to put that in the slide because I think if there's one of the core competencies now for all of us, it's being adaptable, being able to adapt to change. Like, and look what's happened, and I'm kudos to all of you for how you've responded to COVID-19. You know, I mean, we're only, you know, 6.5, a little bit over 6 months into it, and some of the work you've done is remarkable. So again, it's being resilient, adaptable, strategic, and courageous. Now, one of the things I'm really interested in is focusing on core competencies. I always say you don't have to be good at everything. If you're good at 5 or 6 things, that's fabulous. But leverage your competencies by managing, developing, and empowering others and working with those, because you'll be amazed at some of the competencies. Dee and I stopped, Dee Walsh, my co-author, and I stopped counting competencies at 70. There's more than 70, but we found 70 competencies in community development and housing. So you really do need to, you know, build on others and build that capacity. Again, establish multi-sector partnerships. That's really critical. With whether it's public health, the public health system's changed dramatically as a result of the Affordable Care Act through community health needs assessments. There's some opportunities that we didn't have a decade ago. So it's building these high-powered partnerships with these leaders and institutions and connecting it to the community so that they can benefit from it. And then the last one, which you can tell I like enduring institutions, is that build enduring institutions, you know, and we've seen that through the work of Peter and Lynette and the work that Jose and Vanessa are currently doing with their organizations that can weather difficult times. We don't, because how would we have known what would have happened, you know, this year? So that's a really critical element. Next slide. So I ran through this pretty quickly, but I just want to say we really, this session is about looking forward and really capturing, you know, the leadership that many of you are providing and will be providing over a extensive period of time. So I'm going to turn it back to Gisela.
Yes, so all critical elements looking forward for sure. But the one to address inequality and build leadership capacity that reflects the diversity of the communities that we're serving, it strongly resonates with me and the work that we're doing with CCRH through the internship program. And here we have Vanessa and Jose, who are exemplary graduates of this program. So I asked to both of you, Vanessa and Jose, what obstacles did you had to overcome or are currently facing to establish yourself as a leader in your community and your CDC? And what advice or insights you can give to other young up-and-coming leaders in our industry, especially people of color?
Vanessa, would you like to start?
Sure, yeah, I was just unmuting myself here. I would say the biggest obstacle that I had to face was you know, getting buy-in from others, and even buy-in from myself. I mean, you know, and when I'm talking about buy-in, is getting people to you know, understand that I am capable of doing the work that I do. You know, being a woman, being a Latina in a field where there isn't many of us, it was very intimidating at times, especially when it comes to the role that I am in now, where I'm specifically working with projects that are in construction. It's like, you know, this is a field where it's mainly men, you know? So I think it's always been challenging in the fact that, like, you know, getting people to buy in and to understand that, you know, that was something that, even though I looked like something totally different, this little, you know, 5 foot, you know, Latina walking onto a job site, like that was something that a lot of folks didn't realize that I was the project manager on the site, and it was getting them to understand that I knew what I was doing. And what I had to do was, honestly, is, you know, demonstrate my knowledge and come in there confident. And now it's to a point where you end up getting that respect, right? You end up working your way through that respect. So definitely it's getting buy-in from others. And when I also mentioned buy-in for myself, it's like, you know, it's also that intimidation, right? That sometimes we have inside where, you don't see others like you in there. And so you feel sometimes that you don't belong. And so it's sometimes trying to convince yourself that doesn't matter, right? That you can still break the barrier and that you can still do that as long as you know what you're talking about and you understand the knowledge of what it is that you're trying to, overcome or do in that instance. So I would say, that is one of the key motivators that has pushed me to where I've gotten. And it mainly has to be just conquering those fears, having that courage, again, utilizing that passion to, really motivate you to be confident in what you do and help you be resilient throughout, the course of the work that we're doing. And to this day, it's still sometimes difficult, again, whether it is to work up the traditional ladder of leadership, it's difficult because people don't see you as the typical person that would be a position. You usually see a male, or you see a white woman instead of a Latina, and so some things, those kinds of things are intimidators, not only for yourself, but for others. But just remember that, there are others that believe in you and believe in yourself, really, is what it comes down to really get us to those higher places where we belong. And I think my message also for those leaders that are out there like Peter and Lynette is really, taking the lead in fostering that, right? And grooming others to come up that way. Because honestly, one of my mentors was the previous leader for the organization that I started. She was a key motivator in really pushing me to reach for leadership goals in this industry and just in life. And so I think it's really important for us as emerging leaders to have that support, to have those folks that have been through it and that have gone through it and that can really, push us and continue to help us through that pathway.
So I'll add to Vanessa. A lot of it was key also for me. Just more on just being challenged, even people thinking seriously. I remember in my role in the company now, I've been able to work in different departments, from development to asset management to running our programs. But I remember a specific occasion when I was a director of development for the company, and I was in the room, and it was a big development meeting. We're partnering with some other folks, and somebody goes, "Well, where's your director of development?" And I said, "Well, I am him." And he looked at me, and not to be pompous on my side, but he goes, "Well, you're pretty young and you must be pretty smart." And I said, "I am." So that really set the tone, like, okay. But the other thing too is, if you guys have heard about the term gaslighting, sometimes just making people, they start questioning, like, oh, well, maybe you're not supposed to know this. Maybe you are supposed to. You know what? I am doing this. So once people know that you really know what you're talking about, you put in your hard work to know, and you're always willing to learn and listen. And if you don't know an answer, it's okay. Go ask somebody. Go ask other folks who are smarter than you, who have gone through it, have the experience. I think that's the biggest thing also for young leaders, is also just knowing that it's okay to not know something. It's worse to falsely say something. Go get the answers, figure it out. That's been the biggest key thing for me throughout my time, my trajectory, and also just knowing the people you can go to and ask those real questions and get honest feedback. So those challenges of being of color are going to be there regardless, just because usually it's mostly been Caucasian, the male that you see, but it doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. It doesn't mean that's the way it's going to be, because diversity is happening all around us. So it's good to continue motivating others to come into the field and having the exposure, because definitely there's more work for everybody to do, and we need more people to get into this field.
Thank you both. Very inspirational, both of you. And again, I know that our up and coming interns that are coming through the internship program are looking to people, young people who have been in this field for many years. And I think that everyone can offer something for sure. And it's up to us to really seek out those opportunities, rise up, and also use our resources, right? So speaking of, you know, the next generation of leaders, because it's true, the field is changing. Our country's changing, our communities are changing. So I see that as it's happening, it's gonna continue to happen. And if we wanna be in a position that we can continue to sustain our missions, we have to reflect the communities that we serve. So this question goes to all our panelists. How can we best support our leaders of color to move themselves and their organizations through these times and any difficult time in all times? And for young emerging leaders, what are the best ways to support, again, young emerging leaders in this field?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about this, and the fact is, I want to take a step back. For me, my advice to CEOs, leaders, whatever, is build a strong organization, right? Because the organization is what goes on. If it's all about you, and I get uncomfortable sometimes with the focus on this generation of retiring leaders, because the reality is we've done what we've done. We've built organizations, and if you haven't built an organization that can live without you, then you haven't done your job particularly well. I think that's not true leadership. And if our organizations are to be sustainable, the organizational sustainability, I think in today's world, demands inclusive leadership. It demands broad-based leadership within the organization so that it's not focused on one person. The next generation of CEOs, leaders, whatever, are not going to be in the field for 30 years necessarily, though I hope Vanessa and Jose will be. But many organizations are going to go through transitions. And so it's the organization and it's the broad participation of a broad level of leadership staff that will be key to it. And I just think that it's important that the doors be opened up to the range of people in each organization. The programs like the CCRH internship program are awesome, and there need to be more of those because they provide peers, they provide training, they provide mentoring, so that people come back to their or work within their organization with more confidence and maybe credibility. But I just think that the idea of inclusive leadership is the answer to long-term sustainability of the organizations that we all care about.
Thank you, Peter. I couldn't agree more. Others?
Well, I would agree that your internship program is really critical and has become a model. And so now NPH is doing the internship program, and there needs to be more of them. And I agree with Peter's comment about inclusive leadership and developing internally. And the board is important also. Having a board that understands the work and can be supportive. And sometimes board members have become executive directors when at times when organizations have needed it.
Right. I think definitely board also needs to be inclusive and reflective. Yes, like I see, yes, nuts, all right. Other comments? I'm also checking the chat box to see if we have any additional questions here. I don't think we do. Bob, will you walk us through the next segment?
Oh, okay, definitely. So the next slide, please. So what I want to do is I really like, those were great comments. And I was sort of thinking of Vanessa's, even though our situation is different, I found myself, you talked about confidence and not being intimidated. I found myself at 27 being asked to run a national association of community development corporations. And if you ever worked for your board as community development corporation executive directors, you need a good therapist in addition to, it's a fun job. But I was just thinking of, I was so young, you know, and you just had to put one foot in front of the other and show confidence and realize what you didn't know. But that showed that you could do it. So I really, I resonated with what you were saying from your context. So the recommendations, we've really talked about a lot of these. These are ones that sort of Dee and I've come up with over the time, but this is nothing new to you. And also thrilled that CCRH is expanding expanding the rural internship program through some new funding, but it's developing a training curriculum, sort of constantly creating new leaders through many different organizations, many different approaches. I've always been a big fan of communities of practice, and it gets to the peer issue that Peter stressed, which is important, he stressed repeatedly at others, is that creating a community of practice around, it could be around a content area, it could be around similar leadership experience for emerging leaders, so that you have a group of 5, 8, 12. It shouldn't be too large because then you lose the intimacy of it. The mentorship programs, which again, CCRH is at the forefront of, and we'll be able to expand, that really focuses consciously and explicitly on young leaders and emerging leaders of color. That has to be conscious and explicit, and that's what you're doing. So kudos on that. And then additional readers. Well, I'm not a researcher per se, but I like to do leadership research because I've been interested in leadership ever since I was took over the national organization. I said, I got to learn about leadership. And I'm consistent because I think that's what really grows the field, maintains the vitality, and provides a constant, influx of new leaders. So what are the competencies and leadership styles needed? And they do evolve. The organizations are different. I mean, in the early days, they were very comprehensive. They had a lot of money, there were only a few. It changed, not 180 degrees, but close to it. So it's being aware of your ecosystem, where you are, where it's going. It's trying to stay ahead of the game. So those are just some recommendations that then we can move, have some discussion in our remaining time. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of my little PSA. So Dee and I have written a number of papers, and so the leadership paper is the second one, and the PowerPoints will be made available. So you can get it, you can download it from the website. We also did one on collaboration and partnerships, but we also have a book, and it's in paperback, and you can get chapters. It's reasonable. It was very expensive when it first came out because I was the publisher, but it's really, we focus on strategic partnerships, core competencies, leadership. Ebalsi is one of our 6 case studies. So again, I have to, as an author, have to plug my book, or co-authored. So that's a little bit about sort of what the work we're doing, and we continue to write and think and try to move forward. And it's been fun working with CCRH and others and to do this. This is our actually 5th of these workshops that we've done. So we're really grateful. And so I'm just going to I'm going to turn it back to you, Gisela, but I thought I'd sort of give my closing remark, and then I'll promise to be quiet the rest of the time. So I actually just finished reading last month John Lewis's memoir called Walking with the Wind. And John Lewis is, an amazing human being, but I was really struck with the last paragraph. It really spoke to me about leadership, and I'm going to read it to you real quickly. It says that there's an old African proverb, when you pray, move your feet. And he then goes on to say, as a nation, if we care for the beloved community, we must move our feet, our hands, our hearts, our resources to build and to not tear down, to reconcile and not to divide, to love and not to hate, to heal, not to kill. In the final analysis, if we are one people, one's family, one house, the American house, the American family, so I think it's that's our diversity and our strength is working to become that one family. So I think John Lewis did more than cause good trouble. And I just think this to me is a very powerful statement around leadership. And for me, it's sort of like a legacy, something to strive to live up to. So anyway, I'm going to turn it back to you, Gisela, for the questions and the final remarks.
Right. So I'm pondering about that paragraph. And I think what comes to me is, I think this proverb that says, I am you, you are me, which I think it speaks to the fact that, again, when we're thinking about leadership and when we're thinking about what we're doing and why we work in this field, it's because, when we see that humanity in people, we realize that we are all the same. And at the same time, we live this human experience, and there's so much suffering in the world, especially right now. But when we see that humanity of people, we start understanding that what affects other people even if you don't know them, even if they look different than you, your experiences may be so different that at the end of the day, it does affect everyone, and it affects everyone in our society. So that's why we work so hard to uplift everyone, because when we are all doing better, we are truly all doing better. So I really applaud our leaders today for the legacies that you have been building for many years, and to our young leaders for being that example, for being champions, trailblazers, and for being so courageous, especially in such trying times. So I am deeply appreciative of everything you do. I think you are some of the best human beings I know, and I'm just honored to be able to work with you. I worked with you in the past, continue to work with you, and I look forward to, again, continuing to uplift our communities. So with that, I'm just looking back at the question and answer chat to see if there are any more questions. I don't see any questions at this point, but if anyone in the audience would like to unmute themselves and ask any question, or would like to make a comment in this like last 2 minutes that we still have left, I think 4 minutes, this will be a great opportunity to do so. And we are a small group of people, I think, so it would be totally fine to post your question live. Don't be shy. And I had to turn off my camera actually because I was having some Zoom challenges, and so, but now it looks better.
I just want to add that if any attendees want to unmute themselves, use the raise hand feature, and then we will be able to unmute you.
Well, while we're waiting for that, there's a quote, a Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote that I'm sure everybody's seen 100 times in the last few days, but somehow it just really resonates with me. And that is, fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you.
That's great.
Excellent.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, well, I think, again, I extend an invitation from our panelists if there are any final comments, quotes that you want to share with the rest of us.
I don't think I can beat Peter's, but I just want to thank you, Gisela, for doing such a great job facilitating this, and Bob with your amazing presentation and great information regarding leadership. I'll definitely check out your book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say thank you to everybody. It's a good panel and good to see each other and continue learning.
All right. Thank you. Thank you,
you all.
Gisela, Bob, and all of you. So great to hear about the work you're doing, Vanessa and Jose. Keep going.
Yes, kudos to Vanessa and Jose and Gisela for all your work. I appreciate it. It gives us great confidence that it's all continuing on.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Andrea, back to you, our host.
Yeah, so I just want to again thank all the panelists for sharing your insights and your perspectives. I know as a young professional myself, I was able to take away a lot of hints and tidbits from today's session. So I'm sure the audience was able to do that as well. For attendees, thank you so much for sharing your lunch with us. Hopefully you're able to do some work or eat while you're able to listen in to today's session. I do want to invite everyone to tomorrow's session, Impact Investments in the San Joaquin Valley at 10 a.m. tomorrow. So if you're interested in hearing about that, please come back. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. And again, thank you again to our panelists for today's session.
Thank you,
And
Andrea.
thank you, Andrea, doing great work with this summit.
Thank you. No, thank you all so much. We really appreciate your contribution. It really makes a difference.
Great.
Right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Take care.
Bye.